Baldur's Gate 3, an award-winning role-playing game where the role you play is that of a morally questionable meat grinder, mincing your way through hordes of colorful opponents in the hopes of leveling up and gaining some degree of control over a life defined by tentacle intrusions. But in this video, there won't be much hope for my life as I endeavor to beat a game that will probably take me over 100 hours on a supposedly honorable difficulty setting, which gives me 0 second chances, meaning that every choice matters. And if everyone in my party dies, then my one and only save file will self-destruct, and I will have wasted the finite resource of my time. In this Baldur's Gate 3 series, I will also be hunting for the Jack of all trades achievement, meaning that my main character will have to put 1 level in all of the classes, and Withers is not allowed to save me from the nightmare that I'll become. Will I achieve my dream of getting the illustrious golden D20 by conquering Baldur's Gate 3's honor mode, or will I sink into the salty abyss of someone who wasted their life editing a video that makes me look like an utter fool? I suppose there's only one way to find out. Let's go! We start our journey off with perhaps the most consequential moment of our challenge, the character creator screen. When thinking about what would be an appropriate champion that embodies the essence of an individual that lives in a constant state of chaos with no particular set of skills to write home about, my mind naturally gravitates towards the cephalopod Squidward Tentacles, a lifelong cashier with a lot of pride but lacking in raw talent, the true embodiment of a jack of all trades avatar. Being in a low status dead end job is a great thematic parallel to putting 1 level in all 12 classes, since Squidward won't be able to improve any of his core stats, can't access any cool feats, and as the game progresses will feel increasingly left behind by his peers that once respected him. But before we reach the doomer stage of adulthood, I decide that Squidward will be best served by putting his first level into the cleric class. Clerics are super front loaded in the amount of goodies you get right off the bat, with things like spells, cantrips, proficiencies, and also a free subclass choice at first level as well. I go for the life domain since it gives me some extra spells like Cure Wounds and Bless, which do not rely on spell save DC, which means that my wisdom score doesn't need to be high in order for me to use them effectively, which is exactly what Squidward needs since his stats will not improve. The subclass will also give Squidward the Disciple of Life ability, which buffs all healing spells that Squidward casts and also scales with the spell's level, another stat agnostic ability that I can use comfortably throughout this campaign. And of course, Squidward is a cleric of the god of the oppressed and persecuted, which is probably how he feels whenever SpongeBob talks to him. Moving on to Squidward's ability points, I decide to put 17 in dexterity, 16 in constitution, and 14 in charisma, with everything else being dump stats. The reason I chose to boost my dexterity the most is because it's genuinely the most flexible ability score in the game. It bumps up your armor class if you're not wearing heavy armor, it boosts some of the most useful skills in the game such as sleight of hand and acrobatics, and it can serve you well in an offensive role when using ranged weapons or finesse weapons. Having a decently high constitution is also a priority for me, since having more hit points is never a bad thing and will always be useful. Squidward getting a bit of charisma is also warranted since he's such a handsome devil, but also because he's the face of the party, and I want to be able to riz my way through dialogue trees since combat is inherently a risky proposition in honor mode for my turquoise octopus. After, Squidward has a heart-to-heart with a fellow tentacle enjoyer and wakes up on Larian Studios' ubiquitous beaches. I realize that number 1 priority is to gather my party since it's dangerous to go alone. And so Squidward embarks on a journey to make some friends for once in his life so that someone can revive him if he ever gets splattered. We find Shadowheart easily enough and fight some quadrupedal brains together, which gives Squidward enough EXP to get to level 2. I decide to put the second level into the Barbarian class since it gives me the most amount of hit points and also allows Squidward to vent his rage once in a while, making him even beefier. A level 1 Barbarian gets access to the excellent Unarmored Defense perk, which synergizes well with Squidward's base stats of having good constitution and dexterity, allowing me to rip off Squidward's chain shirt and reveal his abs of steel, giving him an armor class of 18. Looking good, Squiddy. Back to gathering party members, we encounter a wild Astarian who gives me the chance to burn away some bad rolls, and we meet up with a friendly wizard who eats magic items for breakfast named Gale. I also tried my hand at talking with a familiar octopod, only for him to try to eat my brains, so I decided to feed him my foot instead. We at last catch up with our not-so-friendly Lae'zel and chop up some tieflings to save her from a wooden cage after pretending to be their friends, which I suppose can be interpreted as an omen for what is to come. Squidward and his merry band of honorable adventurers make their way to a wooden gate that seemed to be having some trouble with a goblin attack. We didn't really get much of a choice as I got sucked into some sort of conflict between the Cult of the Absolute and a druid grove that's housing some tiefling refugees. Luckily, the people there didn't hear about me slaughtering their buddies a couple of feet away from their encampment, and I was able to eventually slide into their good graces by helping them convert the goblinoids into delicious experience points from my party. Fortunately, the battle was fairly straightforward, and I was able to engineer the situation to get as much loot as possible by having my newfound compatriots take the brunt of the beating. After the battle, we head inside the Emerald Grove and find out that people really don't like the tieflings. Not just angry adventurers, but the druids themselves are getting ready to kick out their unwanted refugees. This leads to a rather heated political debate that gets shut down with Squidward threatening violence. We learn from Zevlor, the leader of the Tiefling refugees, that some lady called Kaga is the archdruid in charge of this grove and is performing a magic isolationist ritual to block off the outside world. It seemed like a pretty polarizing topic, so Squidward, being a natural politic, decides to see if he can make the most of the situation and begins to further explore the land of the tree huggers. We make our way to a makeshift prison where we encounter a bereaved tiefling ready to commit some war crimes by executing a prisoner of war. But good thing Squidward's there to assert his turquoise dominance and cut some shady deals with the goblin he just saved. Saza, the goblin prisoner, says that if we bust her out, she can take us to the leader of the goblin camp. And of course, Squidward can't say no when it comes to climbing the social hierarchy, even if it means bullying the helpless. It feels good to be king.
Sir, I'm afraid you've gone mad with power.
Of course I have. You ever tried going mad without power? It's boring. No one listens to you.
Forging ahead, we reach the heart of the druid's grove and encounter a fellow bully in the form of first druid Kaga getting ready to murder a child with her big snake. But of course, good guy Squidward can't let that slide, so he puts on his big boy barbarian pants and rolls his way out of another sticky situation. I honestly didn't know that the barbarian class gave you so many different unique dialogue options, but it's cool how flexing your muscles can make all the difference.
Very well.
After all that talking, Squidward reaches level 3, and I decide to go for the Warlock class this time around. The reasons are similar to the Cleric in that Warlocks get a decent amount of stuff for only one dip of investment. I go for the Fiend Patron since Dark One's Blessing gives me a little bit more survivability in the form of 3 temporary hit points whenever I kill someone, which doesn't sound like a lot, but Squidward can synergize that extra HP with his rage resistances, allowing me to stretch out the Fiend Patron's value. And also, I get access to Armor of Agathis, which is another spell that doesn't care about my spellcasting modifier, while granting Squidward an extra layer of tankiness, with the gravy on top being that my purple first level Warlock spell slot will regenerate every time I take a short rest. At this point, I was feeling pretty good about Squidward's ability to take a few hits in a fight, so I decided to go tell Zevlor about a devious scheme to assassinate the leader of the druids as a way to resolve the brewing anti-refugee sentiments. The mutinous Zevlor gives me the thumbs up to silence the archdruid due to her isolationist leanings, and Squidward merrily wanders off in search of more EXP for the coming storm. I decide that working with the goblins to fight the druid leader seems like a galaxy brain plan since they're already at each other's throats, and so I set sail with Saza trying to smuggle her out of the Emerald Grove, only to encounter some fellow goblins who were less than enthusiastic to see her. Turns out that being a goblin in D&D is worse than being a cashier for the Krusty Krab, which doesn't bode well for Saza's long-term usefulness to my enterprise, but I'll keep that to myself for now.
See you at the camp.
Anyways, now that we're done with goblins, I decide to go talk to some humans who seem to be crying over the dwarven brother's body, and I finally realize what I've always known deep down. Squidward is one special lad.
A true soul.
And one of the main perks of being a chosen one is being able to rip out other people's brain tadpoles and feel increasingly secure in being an octopus, despite having a name like Squidward. After yanking out a brand new parasite and putting it into my cute little jar, I realized that one of the best ways to fund my war against the druids is to directly extract resources straight from the grass touchers themselves. To that end, I decided that daylight robbery would suffice as the druid vendors were not particularly intimidating, and I was often able to get them alone and vulnerable, a perfect target. Sadly, Squidward is not as light tentacled as I need him to be, and he often finds himself behind bars. But honestly, it's not that bad, as the makeshift prison complex is completely unguarded, allowing a slippery criminal like Cephalopod like Squidward to walk out unmolested with shocking ease. Even better, all of his ill-gotten gains are just 2 feet away from the holding cell.
Stop right there, criminal scum!
But of course, Squidward couldn't just let this slide. A cashier demands respect, and Aaron has to pay the price. So the gang breaks his kneecaps and robs the body with none the wiser. I realize how genuinely profitable looting is, and this accumulation of easy wealth feeds into an addiction to thievery, and before you know it, it's a home invasion followed up by immolation. And also I stab her bird as well. But all is well and good, as now I have accumulated a significant amount of wealth, which means it's time to go talk to my favorite desiccated corpse, Mr. Withers. This poorly bandaged mummy is a lifeline for a guy like Squidward, since honor mode is a harsh and unforgiving landscape filled with terrors and bad RNG, meaning that over the course of my campaign, I expect to get dragged through the mud, and I'm probably going to need some backup. Withers is there to send in the cavalry by way of hirelings. These soulless mercenaries are fully customizable characters that stay in my camp for all of eternity, and all it costs is a mere pittance of 100 gold for each hireling. Why does an immortal lich need a bit of gold? Well, I assume it's so they can melt it on his face, but truthfully, it's peanuts for a financial mastermind like Squidward, who now has access to slave labor.
And how can you not make money with such a brilliant idea?
You see, these hirelings function as playable characters, with all of the benefits and none of the personality, which is ideal when wanting to use and abuse the power of spells, buffs, and free healing.
Hey, that's pretty good.
There is a maximum limit of 3 hirelings, so I decided to pick the cleric, the druid, and the bard. All 3 are pure spellcasters that I can transform into spell slot and support mules. This means that I equip my hirelings with supportive abilities and spells so that I can freely go into my camp and receive buffs that don't go away until I long rest. Spells like Long Strider, Dark Vision, Protection from Poison, and Aid. I can also head into this camp whenever I take damage and have the hirelings heal me instead of using a party member's spell slots, preserving my strength for combat scenarios and allowing my team to constantly be in tip-top shape. With the backing of withers and my gaggle of hirelings as support staff, I decide to become a bit bolder and pick a fight with goblins for the sake of experience points. Shadowheart gets critted, and I almost ended my own honor mode campaign due to sheer hubris. But luckily, I remembered that this fight could be finished fast as long as I spanked the goblin boss. So I got Gale to magic missiles him down, and you can never go wrong with guaranteed damage. Eventually, I made my way to the pearly gates of level 4, and I decided to pump a level into the fighter class this time around, as it gives me a good amount of hit points and the second wind ability, which lets me heal a bit for a bonus action. I also take the dueling fighting style, since I will probably be using a shield for the entirety of Squidward's life, so the extra 2 points of damage is not bad for the early game. My thinking behind this is that I probably want Squidward to transition into some sort of utility tank as the campaign progresses, a beefy distraction that focuses on making sure my more useful party members stay alive and can do what they need to do. Going back on the road leads me to a familiar green face in the form of Saza, this time arguing with their fellow goblinoids. Luckily for me, Saza was actually useful for once, and was able to get me past the sentinels without a hitch. After all the trials and tribulations, I finally make my way into the goblin camp, where I can make Squidward's chosen one status known to the local bigwigs.
We'll be heroes.
We encounter Volo the storyteller, who's now a jester for the goblins, and we are able to make contact with True Soul Gut, High Priestess of the Absolute. Squidward gets a nice tattoo and is able to have a constructive dialogue with Gut, who believes she can help with Squidward's unique problems in life. Things seem to be going great, and Squidward was having a blast. Maybe things would go well this time around. Maybe murder and death is not always the answer, and maybe, just maybe, Squidward can turn over a new leaf, live life as a humble cashier working at the Krusty Krab, and be happy with his lot in life. But then things took a sudden and dramatic turn for the worse, when Priestess Gut offered Squidward a relaxing beverage. Squidward is a handsome guy and knows not to accept strange liquids, which True Soul Gut didn't take very well, and decided to knock him out with magic.
Sweet dreams.
Next thing you know, Squidward is tied up and chained down in Gut's sick and twisted pleasure dungeon. The situation could not be any worse, as Squidward tries in vain to squeeze his tentacles out of the perverse mess that he found himself in.
A ferocious squiddy. All for myself.
At long last, after burning through my inspiration points, Squidward was able to slip out of his ironclad bondage, but he was still stuck behind bars, kinda like what happened back in the Grove. But unlike the druids, True Soul Gut has a big meaty ogre guarding her cell, which complicates things. But in Gut's desperation to tie up Squidward, she forgot about the 3 amigos that were standing right outside her doorway, and a rescue mission was born. Unfortunately, Lae'zel is not the sneakiest tool in the shed, and gets caught instantly. But luckily for me, the rest of the rescue party remained hidden in plain sight. Lae'zel getting caught turned out to be an ingenious distraction, and was the perfect window for Squidward to slide out of his jail cell undetected. Now that Priestess Gut and the ogre were locked into turn-based combat, I was able to surreptitiously go around their red vision cones and place down a bunch of explosive material to help me win the fight before it even begins.
Sneaky, sneaky.
Once I was satisfied with the Ring of Death, I kicked off the Massacre with a bit of Alchemist Fire, and made short work of the Burning Ogre with True Soul Gut next on the chopping board. After such a fiery end to Priestess Gut's little dungeon party, I feared that everyone else in the cult may have turned on me, but apparently no one else heard a peep despite the rampant explosions.
Double kill.
Now that Squidward proved himself capable of squaring off with one of the local bigwigs, it was time for a change in venue. All that kinky foreplay from True Soul Gut really awakened something inside Squidward, and I decided to let him explore this new side of him. The flagellation was a nice change of pace, and Squidward's cephalopotic constitution held up quite well, so I decided to give Squidward a more thorough flogging by demanding more whippings, and at the end of the day, things worked out quite well.
You want more? I'll give it to you.
Squidward received Leviatar's Love, which is a passive buff that makes me hit more and think wiser when I'm low on HP. It feels good to be a lovable main character for once. After Squidward got his jollies off, it was about time to get back to work, and the next stop was to go and rescue Volo. It was a pretty simple affair, as all Squidward had to do was flex his level 1 barbarian muscles and convince the jailer to give me the key.
He's the key.
Volo seems to be in pretty good spirits and runs off into the sunset, while Squidward meets up with Saza and the drow boss lady. This time, I hope things will turn out differently, but the treacherous Saza decides to hang me out to dry,
Stick a few holes in him. Show how grateful we are.
and tries to convince the drow Minthara to get rid of Squidward. But good thing True Souls are a tight-knit bunch, and Minthara intuitively understands that Squidward is a stand-up guy.
Your prisoner is one of the Absolute's favorites, Saza.
So now it's Saza's turn in the hot seat, and considering the stunt that she just tried to pull, I decide to twist the knife a little bit by calling her a big dum-dum. Squidward's friends seem to appreciate the levity, and Saza got her just desserts, while Minthara fills us in on an upcoming raid on the Druid's Grove. I was already on a quest to assassinate Archdruid Kaga, and so this was a good opportunity for Squidward to look inwards and reflect on his career choices and what he hopes to accomplish in life. After working at the Krusty Krab for 20 odd years, the fact of the matter is that he's gotten nowhere in his profession as a wage slave. He's stuck in a dead-end job, constantly being exploited by those higher up on the pecking order. He has no real prospects. no lover, and no chance at promotion. But that doesn't have to be his reality any longer. In Baldur's Gate 3, Squidward is the guy that can get things done, the protagonist in a greater story, and is the one who knocks.
The fate of the grove's inhabitants hangs in the balance.
The cult of the Absolute has already given Squidward what he truly craves: power, influence, and authority. With his status cemented as the chosen one of this cruel and unforgiving fantasy land, Squidward gleefully accepts Minthara's scheme to infiltrate and betray the tieflings holed up in the Emerald Grove. It is time for the cashier to get a promotion. But first, let's enjoy watching Saza get pushed to her doom. Now armed with clarity of purpose, I decide to go dig up some dirt on Kaga before Minthara's raid begins. I felt that it would probably make life easier for Squidward and company if we took out the leadership of the druids first, and have the tieflings think that we're still on the same side. After trekking through a dangerous trap-infested swamp, we find a fancy tree area filled with mud monsters and angry treemen. One of the perks of being friends with the goblins is that they had a ton of combustible barrels, and so now I can comfortably set tree people on fire with impunity. Ultimately, fire beats grass, and Squidward's party is able to dust the mud methods and wood woads to dig up their treasure and discover their secrets. Apparently, these monsters were actually put here by shadow druids to guard their communications, their shady plot to control the Emerald Grove from within, using Kaga as their sneaky mole to incite anti-tiefling sentiments in order to perform the magic ritual, which would have allowed the shadow druid money gang to annex the grove in its entirety. This was quite the shocking revelation for Squidward, but it does give more ammunition for him to possibly convince the other druids to fight Kaga and potentially kick off a civil war within the druid circle, which would help expedite Squidward's plan to climb the ranks of the cult. But before launching such an audacious ploy, Squidward decides to take a bit of a detour and throw some rocks at a bear to blow off some pent-up stress. The bear was securely placed behind iron gates, so it seemed like an innocent enough act of animal abuse, but it turns out that no one should ever trust Goblin engineering, and the whole thing came crashing down. The gate squashed one goblin, and the bear came out swinging, resulting in another goblin casualty. This time it was a kid, which I thought you weren't allowed to kill in this game, but I guess bear strength wins out. The bear was tough, but not tough enough to survive consecutive shankings from Squidward's gang of friends, or so I thought. But the bear didn't actually die normally when he dropped to 0 HP. He actually transformed into a druid, and that druid was able to keep transforming into new forms with full hit points, which dragged the fight out. This Halston guy sure was stubborn and refused to go down quietly, but eventually even the former leader of the druid grove succumbed to the fury of Squidward tentacles. This turn of events actually bolstered Squidward's resolve now that his party has experience dealing with the original first druid. Fighting the usurper Kaga shouldn't be that big of a deal. So now the time has come to head back to the Emerald Grove and confront Kaga and her deep state masters and see how much damage Squidward can cause to the druidic establishment. Firstly, it's always good to expose shadowy operatives by calling their bluff, which is what Squidward tries to do. Unfortunately, these shadow druids have a serious poker face, and it will take more than a few verbal jabs to get to them. So now here comes the big guns. I begin the construction of a new explosive death trap around Kaga and the rat-like shadow druids, much to the dismay of absolutely no one. When everything is in place, I position everyone as far away as possible from the incoming detonation and begin one last dialogue with the perfidious Kaga to see if I can spark some sort of internal revolt within the druid circle. Squidward publicly exposes Kaga for working with the shadow government.
What?
And this causes the rats to reveal themselves as the subversive shadow druids. Everyone stands around in shocked silence for a few seconds as they stare at a short-stacked granny being very displeased with this turn of events. Now that the masks are off, we go around and make sure that everyone is up to speed before we kill each other. But right before the battle begins, Squidward gets an interesting option to try and persuade Kaga to not be so evil for once in her life. Out of sheer curiosity, I decided to take that route, not expecting much from something so cheesy, but would you believe me if I told you that all it took for Kaga to change her mind was a bit of pep talk on the dangers of being a villain in a fantasy setting?
What?
Well, apparently that was the push that Kaga needed all along to not go through with her masterstroke plan of betraying everyone who ever trusted her, and astonishingly decides to join Squidward in his battle against the shadow druids.
How was I so blind?
I felt that things have gone just a tad off the rails, but no matter, the barrels of flaming death are still here and in a prime spot to finish off the shadow druids and Kaga all in one fiery blow. So Squidward makes some last minute adjustments, walks as far back as he can, and has the honor of setting the world ablaze with a well positioned arrow of fire.
You may fire when ready.
Once again, Kaga surprises me, this time not with her flexible morality, but with her wealth of hit points, as she survives the blast with a measly 2 HP. Well, alright, that's fine, she's on fire, she'll burn to death once her turn starts, so I order Shadowheart to focus on killing the last of the shadow druids, and to my utter chagrin, Shadowheart high rolls the damage on her sacred flame, instantly killing the last enemy in battle, which allows Kaga, the NPC, to heal herself back to full hit points in a matter of seconds, although to be fair, the burning condition wouldn't have actually killed her because it rolled a 1 for fire damage.
You can't keep getting away with it!
Well, anyways, this all kind of went sideways, and Squidward was starting to get a bit irate with this sappy redemption arc that Kaga was undergoing.
You once called me a monster.
Seems I've proven you right.
But one thing I learned from my 250 hours of playing Baldur's Gate 3 is that there is no problem that a bit of smoke powder can't fix, and so Squidward begins the construction of a second wall of explosive death, this time with the help of a friendly cat that helps lure in the unsuspecting druids to the perfect spot for their impending liquidation. The hapless druids stare in abject terror as a streaking bolt of fire is launched at the explosive barrels that they failed to notice,
Double kill.
leaving only Kaga, Rav, and a wolf alive. The wolf eats my cat and Squidward grows a brain, deciding this time to shoot Kaga with an arrow that prevents her from healing, leaving her mortally wounded and on fire. This second attempt on Kaga's life proved much more effective, as the flames eat Kaga for breakfast. Lae'zel bonks the wolf into oblivion, and poor Wrath is the last man standing. The last druid tries turning into a bird to fly away, but it was all in vain as Lae'zel squashes another animal with her maul. Squidward stands victorious over the charred remains of the druidic leadership, and he has never felt more proud of his life's work. Turns out I didn't even need the goblins' help to kill Kaga or the shadow druids, I just needed their smoke powder. And one of the greatest perks of killing people in their own homes is that you get to freely rob them of all their earthly possessions, like this hidden vault full of treasure that was supposed to be a reward for saving Halston. But Squidward knows the folly of trading labor for capital and understands that free stuff is the best stuff, and no one can stop him now. All of the oblivious druids standing outside, not knowing that their days are numbered, are defenseless against Squidward's outstretched tentacles, stealing their beloved idol. I made up my mind to finish off the druids first before the incoming raid on the grove, so Squidward started doing what he's always been doing, setting up more barrels ready for ignition. It was a fight to the death, with druids, bears, and pigs trying to fend off the onslaught. I thought that the tieflings would try and help me, but then again, foul bloods aren't known for their courage, and they kind of just whimper in the corner as the battle for the sacred pool continued. The last of the druids and their pets fell one by one to Squidward's intrepid band of freethinkers, and now the Emerald Grove is unequivocally druid-free, paving the way for darker deeds to come. But for now, I'll play it cool and bring Zevlor some good news and lower the guard of the tiefling leader. It's just good old Squidward doing what is asked of him, crushing the head of the snake with his suctioned heels and nothing more.
But she left us with no choice.
Zevlor seems to be pleased with the half-truths that Squidward fed him. He even gave me some magic gauntlets as a prize for being such a skilled hitman, but little did the tieflings know, it wouldn't be the goblins that they needed to fear. The hour is late, and it's almost time for Minthara's raiding party to crash through the now druidless grove. Squidward and his party deserve to get some rest and prepare for a day that will live on in infamy. It was quite an eventful night as Lae'zel decides to spaz out on Squidward, and a non-bald octopus decides to appear in Squidward's dream, telling him to eat the mind flayer parasites that he's been saving up. As a new day dawns, Squidward Tentacles chooses to pet his dog Scratch before yanking out the carefully preserved brain-eating tadpoles from his inventory and consumes their psionic potential, adding it to his own. It's a good omen when Squidward can feel his mind turning pale with octopus juices pumping through his brain wrinkles, and now the preparations are complete. The time has finally come. The era of menial labor is long behind Squidward. It is now a brave new world, one that Squidward will embrace with tentacles wide open. Squidward and his minions stomp their way to the front gate of the Emerald Grove, where the tieflings have fortified themselves and prepared elaborate traps to make one last valiant stand against the cult of the Absolute. Zevlor doesn't seem too cheerful, but he still opened the wooden gate for us, so I decided to hear what he has to say.
Get up here!
Squidward, with his impenetrable poker face, is able to squeeze the battle plans of Zevlor, and we learn that all those buried barrels are exactly as I suspected, filled with oil and ready to be lit up. The tieflings will try to draw in the goblin force with a horn, and then light the fuses with their arrows of fire. A pretty solid strategy considering the resources that they have, but regrettably for the tieflings, Squidward has an even better idea. Before all 9 hells break loose, I decide to rob a merchant for good luck, a reminder of how far Squidward has come and his ability to procure free loot, no matter the occasion. Squidward does get caught in the end though.
Pickpocketing has caused quite a stir.
Just like old times, but before he suffers any real consequences for his deviant behavior, Squidward makes a dash for the warhorn, ready to bring about the tiefling's downfall. The raiding party arrives in full force, right on cue. Zevlor makes a speech to steal the hearts of the defenders, and Minthara gives sleeper agent Squidward the command to execute Order 66.
The time has come.
Zevlor is confused at first, but upon seeing Squidward's winning smile, he realizes his mistake.
You're with them, aren't you?
But it's far too late, and the end is nigh. It's nothing personal, Zevlor, it's just business, and I know Mr. Krabs would be proud. The battle begins, and Squidward takes the first stab at Zevlor, proccing his hellish rebuke, which rolls the maximum amount of damage possible to Squidward's face. But the cephalopod is more than capable of taking a few hits. Zevlor swings and misses his searing smite, and I recognize that I'm actually surrounded by oil barrels, so I tell Shadowheart and my other friends to go and pick up duty. The cultist army also has a few tricks up their sleeves, like having an ogre throw a barrel at the tieflings with a goblin inside, and a giant spiders that can jump over walls. The tide of goblins close in on the already open gate, and a deluge of reinforcements that clog up the initiative order pretty much seals the fate of everyone inside the Emerald Grove. It makes me glad that I chose to be on the winning side, as Zevlor is all alone now, and still hasn't landed any of his searing smites on Squidward. A hungry spider chows down on Tiefling leader, and the goblins pour in through the gate. Lae'zel gets the killing blow on Zevlor, and Minthara brain faxes a message to Squidward. The Tieflings are now left without leadership, and without any druids guarding the grove, there is no one that can stop Squidward now.
Kill everyone.
My murderous band of corpse looters make their way down to the Tiefling marketplace and find that the goblins are stealing all the glory. These are the last of the Tiefling holdouts, the ones who are actually capable of fighting back, the ones who are now being cut down by Squidward's company of anti-heroes. With all armed resistance now extinguished, it was time for the finishing blow. We march on Zevlor's private quarters, where the last Tiefling survivors are holed up, most of them civilians, the elderly, all quaking in fear as a turquoise man joins in the bloodbath. Mass murder does take its toll on the muscles, and so now is the time for celebration and well-earned relaxation. The goblins are throwing a victory party at my camp. Volo is back in a cage, Minthara wants to bang Squidward, and things are looking up for the cashier.
Tonight, you are mine.
The floor of my sleeping spot has been painted a lovely shade of red, and the remains of the vanquished decorate my road. Volo seems to be in a pretty good mood, and even wants to write a book about Squidward's heroic deeds. Squidward is living the good life, and there is no denying that he has earned it with the sweat off his brow. Once a poorly compensated employee of a shady establishment, now a daring revolutionary, the chosen one of a flourishing cult, and has a bed warmed by a dark elf dominatrix.
Wow!
Now that's what I call a protagonist worthy of honor.
Oh my.
As Squidward takes one last look at the impact he's had on the people around him, surveying the wreckage, the carnage, and the now cold bodies, Squidward understands only one thing: he has never felt more alive. People may call Squidward many things: monster, villain, psychopath, but within the depths of my heart, I know what Squidward truly is: bold and brash. Thank you guys so much for watching. This is a brand new Baldur's Gate 3 series with a new editing style for this channel. Please tell me if you guys enjoy these types of videos, and as always, I hope to see you all next time. But until then, goodbye for now.